Welcome, everyone, to this briefing brought to you by the Israel Defense and Security Forum, IDSF. It's a great pleasure to be joined once again by the founder and chairman of IDSF, Brigadier General Amir Avivi. General, thank you so much for joining today.
My pleasure.
General, the Prime Minister is going to be meeting with President Trump, and there's a lot of speculation what that meeting will do for this war in Israel. What can you share with us?
Well, I think that this trip is really historical. The things that are going to be discussed will determine how things will look in the coming year and probably the coming years. There are several things that are going to be discussed. First thing is Iran. We had the 12-day war. It was very successful. And the big question is, how do we enforce the reality where Iran cannot rebuild its capabilities? There are three things we won't allow Iran to do. Go back to the nuclear plan, produce ballistic missiles, and continue to equip proxies, as it did before. And we need a very comprehensive policy together with the US to make sure that they don't go back to these activities the way they did before. One big thing that changed is that before everybody was afraid of Iran. They were perceived as a very strong power, and they created some kind of deterrence. And I think that there is an understanding in the US, but also in Europe, that there are paper tigers. They're not dangerous as they seem. We can deal with them, even militarily. And now we need to really build a policy that has to be built on three main things. One is sanctions, sending a very clear message to Iran. Any attempt to go back to terrorism, to nuclear activities, to ballistic missiles will be met with very, very harsh sanctions on the regime that will endanger the regime's capability to govern. And I think the motivation to impose these sanctions now is much, much higher. And the confidence, especially of Europe, is much higher. Second thing is Israel is still looking at Iran as an ongoing campaign. The chief of staff said clearly, we finished a chapter, a very successful chapter, in an ongoing campaign. So all the work of the Mossad, and we had the chance this week, Moshe, to hear from a top Mossad general in IDSF. This work is continuing. The intelligence, the operations that are more underground, all this continues. And last but not least, in the last meeting I had with some of the leading generals of the army, the message was clear. The army is preparing for the next attack. Meaning, if we will see any of these sites being rebuilt or industries that will produce ballistic missiles, the IDF won't hesitate to attack again and destroy these sites. And as we do it, this will endanger again and again the regime. And of course, the US itself has to set a clear policy. When does the US intervene? I mean, President Trump said clearly, if they build the sites, we'll also attack again. So I think that really defining very clearly the policy is crucial. The second thing that is going to be discussed is regional peace agreements, normalization. What are the terms? And how many countries? Which countries? And if we normalize relations, for example, with Syria, what does it mean? What are we demanding? Are we staying on the Hermon mountain? Will we have forces inside Syria? Where is Lebanon going? How much pressure will put on dismantling Hezbollah completely? Saudi Arabia and so on. But there are many issues that are regional and very important to discuss. Last but not least, of course, is Gaza, the ceasefire, and the hostage deal that is being discussed. each time we have a hostage deal and we do a ceasefire for a certain period of time, a month and a half, 2 months, obviously it gets many people and many of our supporters really irritated because we understand what the prices are. Hamas will have the capability to regroup. They'll get humanitarian aid. Many murderous terrorists are going to be released, and it's terrible. It's terrible, and it's a problem. But again, we are in a reality. We are dealing with two options that both have a big downside. One is doing the deal, but dealing with the repercussions. And the other one is not doing the deal and maybe condemning our hostages to die. And I think that the government is trying all the time to balance between the importance of bringing back the hostages and the importance to destroy Hamas. I can say that in IDSF, this is one thing that there isn't an agreement. I cannot say that all the officers and commanders think alike when it comes to this issue. There are those who support doing the ceasefire, who think that it's very important to bring back as many hostages as possible, understanding the price and understanding that we're going back to fight afterwards, as we did again and again. And others also said, no, we have to go in. We have to go in, destroy Hamas, and as we're doing that, we'll try to release the hostages. And I think that there is no right answer here. It's two possibilities. There is one thing for sure, everybody agrees. There is no scenario where this war ends and we didn't destroy Hamas. This is something that needs to be crystal clear. This is a red line we won't and let Israel cross. Hamas needs to be destroyed. And also we need to set the terms that never again there will be a terror army in Gaza. So now there are discussions, and I think there is a fairly good chance that there will be a ceasefire, but we don't know. We don't know because it doesn't depend on us. It depends on Hamas agreeing to the terms that were set. So we're going to wait and see. This week, there was a very big, fierce discussion in the cabinet with an exchange of words between the chief of staff and some of the cabinet members. And the discussion was about the humanitarian aid. The government or some of the cabinet members made two claims. One, that the army is not doing enough to open more centers of distribution using the American company. I mean, we see that it's working pretty well in South Gaza, but in North Gaza, we're not doing that. And in North Gaza, because we're not doing that, we're still sending humanitarian aid directly to the hands of Hamas, which is devastating. So there was a lot of anger, and rightly so, on the army for not moving faster and really building more centers like that also in North Gaza. But there was another issue that is more dramatic. And this is the demand of the government to move all the Gazans, all of them, into the Rafah area, under Israeli control, completely detached from Hamas, and then put a full siege on all of Gaza, all the areas where you don't have Gazans, and no water, no food, nothing, and really within a short period of time bring Hamas to the point where it's done and they have to surrender. The IDF has been preparing Rafah for that, but not fast enough. And one of the things, if there will be now a ceasefire, one of the things that needs to happen is that the IDF moves faster with creating these humanitarian bubbles in the area of Rafah, exactly, by the way, as we in IDSF presented. We came with the idea, we brought the plans, they simply need to execute them. And there was a demand in the cabinet that the army starts really finalizing the plans to move all the Gazans to Rafah, and moving them to Rafah will not only detach completely Hamas from its own society and create the terms for a siege on them, but also it will be a preparation for relocation. So basically relocating them from Rafah voluntarily, according to Trump's plan, is definitely in the right way to go. So I can say that what I sense from the government is very, very, very resolute in achieving all goals of war. There is a whole media campaign trying to portray a reality, but that's it, we want to get this over with. And there is no getting over with. Hamas stays, it will rebuild itself and will continue fighting again and again and again. We want to get it over with. We need to destroy Hamas. We need to encourage relocation. We need to create a completely different reality in Gaza for good. And then it will really be game over. So this message was really the message the Prime Minister was trying to convey this week in several occasions, including the moment before he went on the plane to the US. And what will be agreed this week will be dramatic for our future. All the biggest things are being discussed. There is one thing that all the ministers of the government asked the Prime Minister to discuss, and I don't know if this is going to happen. This is sovereignty, calling for applying sovereignty in Judean Samaria and the Jordan Valley. I don't know if in this specific meeting this is going to be discussed. I hope it will be discussed, but I don't know for sure. I do know that in the last time we were in Washington, not long ago, when we checked whether there was any talk between Israel and the US about sovereignty, the answer was a resounding no. There were no talks until now. So I'm not sure if it will happen now, but I'm sure that this is a crucial thing to do in the coming year, maybe a year and a half, but we need to also apply sovereignty, and we'll see what happens. So everybody now is looking at this upcoming meeting with the Prime Minister and President Trump, and soon enough we'll know where this is going. Moshe?
General, thank you for all of that. Many different topics covered. I want to ask you pointed questions here and there. If we can kind of go back to what you began with on Iran, have there been any clear demands or clear guidelines for what Iran needs to be doing or needs to get to in order for there not to be another military campaign? Meaning, after the U.S. had their very successful operation, after Israel had its successful operations, has there been a very clear message to Iran, a list of things that need to be done? Do we know what that is?
So no, I think that basically Iranians understand exactly what they're not supposed to do: not develop nuclear weapons, not have a ballistic missile program, and not equip proxies. This is basically the list. And not promote terrorism. But I think that following the meeting this week, there needs to be internationally a clear message to Iran what not to do. And this doesn't even require a negotiation. There is all the time I talk about needing to negotiate with Iran. As far as I'm concerned, there's nothing to negotiate. There is a clear message. 3 no's. Not to nuclear weapons, not to ballistic missiles, not to equipping proxies. That's it. And if you do, harsh sanctions and the operations, kinetic and not kinetic. And then if Iran says, look, you know what, we'll change and let's talk about peace and let's talk about cooperation, then, it's worthwhile to do negotiations. But when we destroyed their nuclear capabilities, there is nothing to talk anymore about, nuclear discussions, because The message is very simple. There is no nuclear capability. You cannot enrich uranium at all. You cannot continue trying to weaponize, nuclear warheads. And that's it. There's no need for negotiations for that.
So presumably since June 21st until now, Iran has not been trying to enrich uranium. They have not been trying to rebuild their ballistic missile infrastructure. They've not been trying to rebuild their proxies. They've been cold and quiet.
No, they're not called quiet. They're trying to assess the damage. They're doing initial really checks about what happened to them. They're assessing and thinking where to go. Just this week in the Golan Heights, twice we arrested the Iranian cells in the Golan Heights. They're operating all the time. But we are moving from a war, a 12-day war, to an ongoing campaign. And in this campaign, there will be sanctions, there will be ongoing special operations. And the question is, what is the policy regarding Air Force attacks or things like that? And this is something that must be coordinated between the US and Israel. What are the red lines? Building again air defense, building industries to produce ballistic missiles. There are many red lines that they need to be defined. And we need to be coordinated what we're going to do.
And in your view, are sanctions possibly going to work this time around now that this military operation happened and there's something to really focus on with sanctions?
When you do sanctions seriously, they work. The problem is that the policies change all the time. You had one administration imposing harsh sanctions, and then the next one relieving them, and again sanctions, and again relieving them. So we need to be consistent. We need to be very clear. And if they try to rebuild all these things, impose very, very harsh sanctions on them. And if they continue, we'll need to attack one way or another.
And knowing this will be the final question on Iran before we move on, knowing that the Iranians play the long game, that they're okay with delaying their destruction of Israel, so to speak, for 10, 20, 30 years from now, are you worried that under the Trump administration, there may be a meeting of the minds and there may be harsher sanctions, but come a few years from now and those things can potentially change?
They can always change, but I think that if we keep Iran very, very weak, it will be less important. Because if they are really weak and without capabilities, the chances of even another administration to try to appease them will be much lower. Because if they are weak, they're not that interesting. And remember, Moshe, that this is not just about what's happening in this moment. Because if we move forward with building an American, a European, Israeli, moderate Sunni alliance that will stand strong against Iran, this is what will ensure that no matter which administration you have an alliance. You build a corridor of trade, you build a military alliance. And this is not going to change so fast. And then the only thing that can happen is saying to the Iranians, it's game over. So, stop playing games and, join the prosperity and move towards a different, vision.
Okay, General, completely different question. And thank you to all of our viewers who send in questions. And there's one thing that so many people have asked over the past few days, because there was an article that came out in the Wall Street Journal about certain sheikhs in Hebron who are approaching Israel to join the Abraham Accords. You've spoken about this a number of times on these briefings and your own personal experience and your own personal connection to these sheikhs in this story. And a lot of our viewers are asking for more clarity, more insight about whether this is actually something that can happen. Are these sheikhs just posturing to push out the PA? And are people in Israel really optimistic that they can go somewhere?
So, when before Oslo, when Israel was trying to move towards some kind of agreement with the Palestinians, the formal discussions that were being held in the US, under US umbrella, were the discussions with the local leadership of the Arabs in Judea and Samaria and Gaza. And the local leadership is mostly based on clans. As these discussions were going on, Peres, with his guys, they opened a side discussion in Oslo with Arafat. At the time, Arafat was very, very weak. He wanted to find a way to become relevant again and use this process to, like the Trojan horse, to go into Israel and then destroy us from the inside. And for some reason, these side talks became, at a certain point, the main talks. And then we found ourselves in Oslo, bypassing the local leadership of the Arabs in the area of Judea and Samaria and Gaza. Now, because at the time, Arafat and this Palestinian Authority that was created came with a lot of support and money, and they managed to take control of everything, and really huge amounts of money were poured. And so, the local leadership was fairly quiet and accepted the reality. But looking 30 years afterwards, when you see in the streets of the Palestinians the discontent about the Palestinian Authority that is perceived really as terrorist and taking care only of their private bank accounts, completely corrupt. And they're also abusing their own society, stealing money, creating a lot of problems. And people are fed up. So some of them try to move to Hamas and other organizations. I mean, today, if you do elections in Judea and Samaria, Hamas will be elected, not Palestinian Authority. So as we are destroying Hamas on one hand and looking at what will happen in Gaza, we already decided in Gaza the day after, putting aside the issue of relocation, Israel is saying there will be no Hamas, no Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and not the Palestinian Authority. So basically, really, if this is the case, the only solution you have is based on the clans, because there's no other solution unless we want to manage everyday life, schools, and sewers in Gazan cities. And I don't think we do. So if we're moving in Gaza towards some kind of cantonization, some kind of local management based mostly on clans, this makes also this issue very relevant for Judea and Samaria. And this meets a reality where in the last few years, local clans have been talking about that, especially in the area of Hebron. We met with members of Jabri family years ago, like 3-4 years ago. And a few months ago, they came with a big group of other clans, representing hundreds of thousands of people, that said, we want to detach from the Palestinian Authority and become a kind of emirate. We want to join the Abraham Accords. I don't know why there was a decision to publicize this in the Wall Street Journal. When I learned that there's going to be a publication, I spoke with the reporter and also gave my understanding, but I wasn't very, very happy about the publication itself. And of course, now that it has been publicized, many people are afraid, that the Palestinian Authority will kill them and the IDF maybe won't defend them. So they're like saying, no, it's not exactly like that, and trying to hide. But the reality is that definitely this is the right vision. Now, when we talk about it, and people, especially people who are more into the details of the everyday life in these cities, they start going to details. Is it possible? Is it not possible? When it will happen? In 2 years, in 5 years, in 10 years? And I'm saying this is not the important thing. It's not about that. It's about the framing. It's about us. It's about the world. It's about the ability to say there is a solution that is different from the two-state solution, which is more relevant, more viable. It enables Israel to apply sovereignty on most of Judea and Samaria without undermining the idea of some kind of self-governance or without needing to annex all the Palestinians and give them Israeli citizenship. There is a solution. We can really take care of our security, prosperity, really attach to our values and history and important places, and at the same time, really create some kind of solution that will work for us. And it's not a terror organization, and it's not paying billions to terrorists, and it's not a completely corrupt system like the Palestinian Authority. So the fact that this was published as a solution and creates a discussion, just the discussion by itself, is a huge change. And we need to push this discussion and say we have solutions. We can move forward in the coming months, a year, two, to push our policies, to apply sovereignty without being afraid that what will we do afterwards? Will we have to annex all these Palestinians? And the answer is no, we won't. We can have full security responsibility over all the land of Israel. We can have responsibility over the borders. We can have responsibility over the spectrum in the skies. We can bring millions and millions of Jews to live in Judea and Samaria, and still we have a solution based on cantonization, local leadership, yes or no emirate in the local cities of the Arabs in Judea and Samaria. There is a solution. And maybe we'll see the beginning of this solution in Gaza, and then we can do it in other places. But in my vision, as far as I'm concerned, the faster we get rid of the Palestinian Authority, the better. They are a vicious, terrible enemy that is inciting globally, that is promoting anti-Semitism everywhere, that is standing behind BDS, that is funding terror in billions. And we need to get rid of them. Anything is better than this Palestinian Authority and these terror organizations like Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And we should push towards local management of the cities and cantonize them, not one government.
Brigadier General Amir Avivi, thank you for sharing all of that. Thank you to all of our viewers and supporters for tuning in, asking your questions, allowing us to get you the info that you want to hear. If you're watching on this on YouTube, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing this so we can get the truth out to even more people. We will be back with you tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. here in Israel. Until then, stay safe, stay strong. Take care, everyone.